how do you figure out where AI fits in your process? Where does it fit between, the designer and the marketer and figuring out what's actually going to go out to the world? How do we figure out that we're using it in a way that's in line with the company's values and with the brand reputation that they want to maintain? We really have to be careful and thoughtful about these things.
Everywhere you look, it seems that marketing is getting to know you just a little bit better. And as marketing is becoming more personalized, generative AI is a major component. But what are the ways to personalize it without creeping out the consumer? And how can Gen AI play a larger role at making it more effective? Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Emily McReynolds, Head of Global AI Strategy at Adobe, and Pierre Charchaflien, VP, Senior Partner, and Marketing Practice Global Leader at IBM. Let's just jump right on in. What does personalization in marketing look like today, thanks to Gen AI?
I think personalization has made great strides in today's corporate world as brands try to build better relevance with their customers and consumers. I think we're seeing better leverage of data. I think we're seeing better leverage of technology. So examples would be not only in certain terms of personalizing an email to you with your name, but actually personalizing the experience itself, the product experience itself. So think of you buy a product online. Well, as an example of buying a product online, you have sort of auto replenishment. Well, these auto replenishment solutions or engagements, they allow you to throttle the shipment, to kind of, customize it based on your preferences. That's a real good example of how technology in supply chain actually is allowing us to personalize the entire experience, not just the marketing communication of it. So I think we're seeing a shift from personalizing communication, like the personalized salutation, to truly personalizing experiences. But I think we still have a long way to go and plenty of opportunities to capture.
I love that. One of the opportunities we're seeing, and I think we hear personalization today and we're like, haven't we been talking about this for years now? So what's different? What's new? And really generative AI and some of the new technologies that are coming out allow us to do it hopefully in a less data heavy way, in a more efficient way, being able to reach people with what we know is the content they're looking for, better accessing and utilizing the data we do have.
For sure, Emily. Today versus tomorrow with Gen AI, I think that's what I'm talking about in terms of having an incredible amount of opportunity to leveraging Gen AI to really unlock the potential of personalization.
Well, how is Gen AI making that personalization at scale more possible? I'm just curious about how the marketer's playbook is changing and all of that.
Adobe has shared a number of examples that I think are really helpful. So two I'll mention. With Pepsi, they have created 500,000 on-brand personalized assets in under 5 days using Adobe Firefly. And Pfizer saw a 5x increase in content creation volume with a huge reduction in effort. So we have these examples where this additional content is coming more efficiently and more targeted. Another example I often talk about is how there's an example of a finance company that had, it typically took them about 8 weeks to go to market with a new marketing campaign to get through all the asset development and publication and do their analysis. And once they had started using generative AI, they went from 1 campaign in 8 weeks to 4 campaigns in under 6 weeks. So I think the number is huge when I cite the Pepsi example, and most companies and organizations won't reach anywhere near that. But the idea is that you have all these abilities to do more targeting. So instead of one image or one ad for 1 million people, maybe you're doing individual ones for 20 or 30 person groups, but still reaching that huge number.
Oh, so is that kind of like when we log on to a streaming service, for example, and then each of us may see a different thumbnail that's sort of trying to get customized towards whatever our other preferences have been on that platform?
Yeah, very similar to that. It's even a step further than that, Albert. So the streaming service takes your behavior and say, okay, based on that, I'm going to curate these specific programs or shows for you. But let's actually take the example that Emily mentioned, right? Let's say I'm trying to promote a shoe. to different customers. Well, for me to talk about the shoe to you because you are fashion oriented versus somebody else who is performance oriented, a copywriter will have to sit down and write different copy today to you versus somebody else. That's why personalization today is limited. With generative AI, I can just feed it and say, hey, I have two personas. One is athletically oriented and the other is fashion oriented. Give me two different copies to describe that shoe on the website when they log on. And then boom, the technology is there to allow us to display that content to you versus to Emily, based on your persona and based on your preferences. That is the power of generative AI. Now, that's only two examples. What if I took that and I made 100 examples of that, right? That's possible with generative AI without necessarily having 100 people writing different copies for those personas. Yeah, does that make sense?
No, that makes so much sense. That's incredible. And it seems also very efficient. So from a tech perspective, how do we set up systems that can start optimizing that level of personalization?
One of the things I've worked a lot on is thinking about how we adapt existing company processes, because you've kind of hit on this. It's great to have all these new opportunities, but what does it look like to change your internal processes to take advantage of these options? So how do you figure out where AI fits in your process? Where does it fit between, the designer and the marketer, and figuring out what's actually going to go out to the world? How do we figure out that we're using it in a way that's in line with the company's values and with the brand reputation that they want to maintain? We really have to be careful and thoughtful about these things. And so, I talk a lot about what you look at as you're looking at your company and what kind of values and standards you have and what kind of governance processes you already have. So I think those are important considerations in figuring out where to start and how to leverage the technology.
So does that then mean that people who right now may be specializing in copywriting might also be putting on the hat of being a proofreader?
In a way, there's a shift in the role of the copywriter. I think the copywriter is going to shift from writing copy to perhaps editing copy, which is, you're right, because we're having generative AI engines give us 30 versions of an email that they want to send to customers based on personas, right? Well, the copywriter will move from writing all of that to tweaking some of it to make sure it's on tone, it's on brand guidelines, to make sure the model did generate the right copy, which it doesn't necessarily take the creativity from it, but because the creativity of the writer will feed the model itself, but it's going to shift a little bit the role of associates from purely generating to also editing. So yeah, your comment is kind of right. It's kind of shifting the role a little bit from a writer to an editor. Yeah.
I want to build on that for just a second, because where our creativity is going to be seen is in how we describe what we want from these systems. So there's a lot of talk about what input goes in and how we write the prompts. And for almost a year now, we've had roles around like a prompt engineer. And I think the creativity that a copywriter has or a designer has really goes into the system being a tool that they can guide. So knowing what they want to get out of it, the creativity comes in, how do you design the prompt? If you give a prompt, if you give an input that is just like, a meeting room full of people, or I want to approach 25-year-olds, you're not going to get very much back out of the system. It's not going to give you anything you want to edit. So I think there's still a real element of creativity in thinking about how you work with these tools, just like you would work with so many other tools that we've used over the last 20 years.
So then is that going to be how a company will be able to remain relevant and different, since everybody's going to be able to have access to a lot of these same tools?
Let's say if you forward 5 years from today, right? Everybody has the same technology. Everybody has generative AI. Everybody has all the technology at their disposal. How will one company differentiate itself on personalization as a strategic advantage versus another? And I think that's where the customer relationship and the trust comes in. See, if you have the success of these models and the success of generative AI is driven by the data that you feed it. If I have your trust and you're telling me information about yourself that you're not given to any other brand. For example, your favorite color is yellow. Okay, right? Based on that, if I have this information, I can serve you an ad, promote a product to you in yellow and build a higher relevance to you versus you going to somewhere else and not being able to serve with that. I do believe the strategic differentiation and strategic advantage in the future of brands is going to be the data that they will collect from their customers that they only have and nobody else has. How do you do that? By building trust with them, by giving them value with that data, by not violating the trust. And then with that, those customers will continue that relationship with you. And that's how you build that differentiated competitive advantage. I believe that is going to be one of the key ways that is going to differentiate brands in the future.
Emily, do you agree?
It's an important point because we know we have statistics on customers appreciating things being personalized to them. Nobody wants the pair of boots they looked at tracking them across the internet, right? That's the kind of version that we get uncomfortable with, that we don't like, but we do like it. You know, I have been served some ads. My latest backpack is from an ad I got that was, you know, super on point. It was exactly what I was looking for, right? And now backpacks I don't want are following me around the internet. Not great, you know? So there's that data aspect that's really important. But I think there's still going to be the element of a conversation and creative people saying, how do we want to approach this segment of customers? What do we think the best way to do that is? Because we can create the copy, we can leverage all the data. But I really think it's still going to come down to smart, creative humans who are figuring out how to approach these tools.
Let's get to that big bad wolf in the room, or maybe in Emily's case, the big bad backpack in the room. How do you make sure that the customer doesn't feel like you know too much?
I'm going to actually go back to what Pierre said about trust. Because if I'm using a system, if I'm working with a company that I know has good privacy policies and data governance and, you know, has a decent reputation, we've seen the data breaches and things like that where, you know, it's on the front page and that really impacts the trust you have for the organization, the company that you're looking at. So I think we're going to still be in that brand reputation space, in that trust that they aren't using my data poorly. I think it'll be an important consideration, just like it is now. It'll still be a very important consideration 5 years from now.
I do believe that trust is a critical currency in the new world. And I do believe that disclosure of brands telling you as a customer, I'm collecting this data from you, demonstrating to them that this is how you're using this data and making sure that you're relevant. I think as long as you do that with disclosure, with transparency, and explaining the purpose of why you're collecting this data and then delivering relevant value to that customer, I think that's how you protect yourself as a brand versus sort of violating that. You know, I think you're always going to have a bad backpack ad because, you know, especially when you don't have a relationship with the brand yet, right? So they're trying to get you, they're trying to acquire you, and they're trying to use the best data they have available to basically attract you to their brand. It's really when you start that relationship with that brand, and that's how you build that trust that Emily was talking about.
We talk about transparency with AI so that people know it's being used, so that they understand where it's being leveraged. And I think it's the same, you know, when you are clear, when you don't just throw 15 pages of legalese of a policy at someone, but you take the time to have an interaction that they can parse through and understand and that they know has had time and effort put into it. I think that kind of transparency really has a positive impact.
Well, and I want you two to interact with each other on this one. I'm going to ask you both to think of a number, and then I want to compare your numbers. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 10 being the most proficient, how comfortable do you think that customers are right now with the amount of information that they believe is being collected regarding their marketing preferences?
Can I say it depends on the generation you're asking? Because there is a big difference, okay? If you're talking to someone in my generation, the answer is going to be 5 or below. If you're talking about a 20-something, it's going to be 8 or above. But that new generation is willing and is comfortable sharing information with you. But if you violate that trust with them, or if you don't deliver relevance or value to them, they will leave you forever. The risk of you breaking that trust with them is more severe. Where with me, if you give me a bad ad for a backpack, I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'll just, keep on dealing. So the expectations are different and the rewards are different. I think the new generation that's 20 something, I don't want to label it, the 20 something, the teens of today's, they grew up interacting with digital devices, sharing information, getting information. And I think their attitudes around sharing data are very different than the 50 plus.
This is why Pierre and I have a great time, because I'm going to disagree. I think I'm actually going to put the numbers more on a persona and perspective. So someone who, if you get a privacy professional, my background starts in data and data governance, I'm going to be like, I don't know about how much that data I'm comfortable with. I think it might be less about age and more about like what technologies you're using and what products you're buying. So we definitely have tons of research that says, this age group thinks that, this age group thinks another. But the young folks are also the people who made Snapchat possible, right? Who made Snapchat, which has disappearing messages, so popular. And yet we also have the social media platforms that are absolutely consuming tons and tons of data in order to deliver you an experience that you like. One of the things I have worked on is how you explain these systems. So how you help people understand them. Published papers, developed methods like something called system cards that allows you to try out what that personalization looks like. So you can actually say like, well, if I prioritize this aspect, what will I see versus if I prioritize that aspect? So I think it's as much about comfort around technology and understanding how the systems work as it is about a particular age group. Every age I have been concerned about data, which is why I'm here talking to you.
But you haven't given me a number yet, Emily. What's your number?
My number, I think, is in the 5 for a company I trust, and probably higher if I know they have good data practices.
When you talk about a company that has good data practices, who are the key players that are needed to implement AI successfully in that marketing? I know that we talked about prompt engineers before, but who else needs to be on the squad?
I think it's a really important consideration to have an interdisciplinary approach. We just published a paper in the last 6 months talking about how companies can adopt AI. And one of the things I suggested in that paper is that you form an interdisciplinary committee. So that means the marketers, absolutely. But the number of times I've had conversations where legal wants to talk about it, or privacy or security, or, different business parts of the company have different perspectives on where they want to use AI or how they want to leverage data. Not to, slow down innovation by putting too many cooks in the kitchen, but really thinking about who needs to be consulted and even sharing that information. So I've written a number of papers at different companies about how they do their data collection, data sharing, and thinking about what that transparency looks like. And it means a lot when it comes from a general counsel or a chief privacy officer or a chief information officer. I think having people sign that information when you're being transparent about it is really important. I have talked to so many chief marketing officers, chief information officers who tell me all the different people they have to partner with at their company to use a technology.
A paper that I wrote last year, which is called Personalization at Scale. A lot of people do personalization, but how do you really do personalization at scale? And one of the things that I talk about is that personalization at scale, where it's really pervasive in an organization, requires a different operating model. And that operating model, the old waterfall methodology of doing things just does not work. It's not nimble enough. It's not fast enough. The other thing about it, Albert, is that there's so much convergence between business and technology that having those organizations be separate doesn't work anymore to deliver the work fast enough. So I agree with Emily that you really need what we call a pod structure. And in that pod, what you bring in business, you bring in technology, you bring in legal, you bring in really all the facets that need to work together to deliver on something. And then those pods will operate in what we call an agile methodology, where you're iterating quickly, and they're task-oriented or an outcome-oriented versus a function-oriented. So you really can come out of your function. Yes, I'm marketing. Yes, I'm IT. Yes, I'm legal. But I come together in this pod structure for me to do my work. Now, that evolution has started before generative AI. But you can imagine with generative AI, it's going to even accelerate the pace of work even more. It's going to exponentially increase the complexity of the work. So I think the importance of the pod structure and the agile ways of working are going to be even more important in the future.
I think one of the things I've heard a lot of concerns about right now is, okay, we get generative AI and it's producing so much more content. We've figured out like how to integrate it into our processes. But you know what? Now we have tons more pieces and our review process is the same. So our review process still has to see every single piece of content. And I think that really like highlights the issue people will face if they don't take the approach that like Pierre is talking about here in thinking about their processes, in making it more agile. So I've worked on what are some examples, like, is it getting an organization comfortable with a series of prompts that if you use this prompt, if you use this input, you can use the output? Is it figuring out, what categories of things still need review, but what other things can just go through? Because if you have this fast, great technology and your processes haven't changed, they haven't become more agile like Pierre has described, you've just created more bottlenecks.
So not only that we're applying generative AI to create the content, but think about the incredible increase of demands on legal reviews. So at IBM Marketing, we actually created a Gen AI model to actually review the content from a legal perspective and be able to create a little bit of a legal score. So for example, are using, extreme words like always and forever and things like that. So it goes through the copy and the generative AI engine actually reviews the content and gives you a legal compliance score. Now, if it's completely green, it goes through. If it's yellow or orange or red, then the legal person will look at it. It'll highlight for you exactly what the issues are with that content and be able to accelerate that. So we're seeing the use of generative AI, not only in creating assets in copy, but actually in facilitating work processes. And I think we'll see that evolution, that creativity continue to increase.
I think what you've hit on there is there's this capability and it can sound almost magical. Like for people who've spent many years going through reviews and the back and forth in the emails or now the like Slack channels or Teams or whatever it is, right? That sounds like it could almost be magic. But one of the great things about large language models, about generative AI, is the ability to train it on a certain set of words to look for those, like always and never. And so it might sound like something that is complicated and hard and what do machine learning engineers do, but some aspects that are really simple, giving it a list of words to look for.
You're making some really convincing cases for why business leaders should prioritize AI in marketing investments. But if I'm still on the edge of this waterfall, can you push me over a little bit more?
I have spent over 10 years now thinking about what it looks like to implement emerging technologies. How do we get comfortable with them? Because on the one hand, you might be at the top of the waterfall. Oh, that looks risky. Like, what's going to happen if we jump, if we fall? What's that going to look like? If we're thinking about that, how do we get comfortable with risk? Like on the one hand, new technology. On the other hand, like we know businesses need to take risks to succeed. You don't want to fall behind your competitors. You want to make sure you're continuing to innovate. And so we already have perspectives inside of a company on where the risk is comfortable, how we prepare to address a risk, what we're comfortable launching as like a pilot or as an initial situation, and then we'll evaluate and review. So I would say if you want to get ready to go for a fun ride on a waterfall, you're looking at what your current risk approach is. You're thinking about how you do this with other things in your business. Because while it's a super exciting new technology, there's also like business processes. We have ways to do these things.
Yeah. No, I agree with Emily. I mean, I've been doing marketing for a little bit longer than 10 years, and I've been lucky enough to see several waves or paradigm shifts, sorry for using that word, in marketing, going from database marketing to digital marketing to AI to generative AI. I think we are facing a whole new paradigm shift with generative AI. I think it's going to fundamentally change how white collar productivity actually gets done completely. It's going to replace some of the tasks that we do. But before we get there, there is a trust issue. I agree with Emily. These models are still very new. They're still going to get trained. A lot of people don't understand, and that's where the trust is, lack of understanding of how these models work, truly to trust the outcomes from, make sure there's no hallucination in the models. So I think companies are going through, and I just finished a research that we're doing on the adoption of generative AI, and Emily knows all about it. And we're seeing an uptick from last year, right? We're seeing an uptick from I'm exploring to I have solutions, or from I haven't really touched it to exploring. We're seeing that evolution. So just like with any other technology, I think people will have to go through the comfort of that technology, but then also they have to go through how do I change my work, my processes, my function, my organization to really take full advantage of that technology. So I think that process is already happening, and I can probably tell that it's happening faster than any other technologies that I've seen before. We've gone within 24 months, relatively speaking, from a new concept to a concept that's being adopted, that's being funded by billions of dollars in corporate America because of its promise. And I think the promise is fantastic.
There's so much momentum there, and that promise is fantastic, but it can also be a little bit scary to be moving so quickly, Pierre. So how can companies shape their marketing teams to be more Gen AI ready?
I think we've gone through that shift when organization had, I have my offline marketing team, now I have my digital marketing team, and now everything became digital marketing. I think companies will have to go through IBM. I'll use IBM as an example, and we have 400,000 employees within IBM global. I may have that number not precise, but it is in that magnitude. And what we've gone through mandatory online training of what generative AI is. We've gone through certification of how does Gen AI work. We've done hackathons around generative AI so we can build our own accelerators, right? So I think the education, the training of corporate America is going to be very important, right? And I think that's part of the process, is really educating folks on what generative AI technology is, how does it help you do your work, what are the pitfalls of it. So that's the education part. The second part is the evolution and the maturity of the technology itself. And the third is the operating model, the people, the processes, and all of that. All those are legs of the stool that have to work together, right? They have to be together. And when all of those mature, and we're seeing it mature, it is really when you start to get the full realization of the benefits of generative AI. So I would say we've learned from the past. We've learned through several, and we're lucky enough because change is happening so quickly that some of us have seen several shifts in technology and then we've adapted to it. And I think corporate America has lessons that they can learn from in kind of how to adapt and adopt these new technologies.
Emily, Pierre just presented this sort of three-pronged approach, and I believe that second leg was maturity. So I want to know from your perspective, from where you're sitting and where you're working, when do you think that Gen AI is going to reach that level of maturity to get to this bright future and completely shift marketing in the way we know it now?
I think we're starting to see it. I don't think it's hyperbolic or overly exaggerated to say this is a revolutionary technology. We don't want all of our notes to be buzzwords or analogies, but I do think we're seeing a massive shift. To go back to something I mentioned earlier, I put this 4-part framework together that really thinks about it as a cycle. So generative AI as a technology, very functional. It's new, it's uncomfortable in some places, but I do think what we're looking at in terms of maturity is the companies and how they're adopting it. So my 4-part framework looks at how do you assess your policies, your practices, your organization, the technology you're using? How do you pilot it? What do you need to think about when figuring out, is your organization ready for this? Is this the right technology for you? When you adopt it, critical piece Pierre brought up is training. I've heard from C-suite who say, we bought generative AI and no one is using it. My next question is, how did you roll it out? What did you tell your people about it? How did you help them understand where it fits in their workflows? That there's a learning curve, but it'll be worth it in the end. And then a really critical piece when it comes to generative AI is the monitoring aspect. And this is a cycle. It's not, this kind of framework allows you, no matter where you are on your implementation and adoption journey with generative AI, whether or not you consider yourself mature, we'll talk about monitoring and how are you making sure it's not having unintended outcomes. If you're just starting to think about the shift, you're like, oh, generative AI, I gotta do this. It's changing marketing. It's going to change the way we all work. Then, there's an approach for that. I think it's really helpful. I like Pierre's 3 legs of a stool in terms of including the people. And in terms of maturity, really thinking about where you are on your AI journey and having these different aspects that you can walk through.
Let's walk through some of that AI journey together, theoretically, right? Hypothetically, let's think about the next 2 years. From both of you, I want to know, what's the usage? What's the perfect AI personalization usage that we are going to encounter in the next 2 years? Emily, let's start with you, and then Pierre, I want to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm really excited about the ability to have people who are maybe less experienced with data, less experienced with targeting, be able to do more things with natural language. Early days with generative AI, it's like, okay, cool. If you played with some of the early products, you were like, oh, cool, a better chat bot. I can ask it questions. Oh, I can get an explanation of something, or I can start an email. But where I think it's really exciting and the big change that's going to happen over the next 2 years is being able to use natural language to ask questions of your data. Being able to use natural language to go through 1,000 documents and marketing pieces you have and pull out key phrases. Being able to tailor it to your brand. So I think those are some of the aspects that in the next 2 years we're really going to see flourish.
I like Emily's examples. I'm going to go on the other side, though. And while I think us being able to probe our data and all that is really exciting, I'm a customer guy. I've helped my clients over 20, 30 years redefine their customer strategy. And I think we have an incredible opportunity to really apply generative AI to treat each customer based on their needs. Finally, the promise of doing that is here. I don't think it was here 5 years ago. So the example, what I said, to promote a product online, you're coming to shop for a pair of shoes and seeing the copy, the pricing, the actual journey that you have to go through to get that shoe to your house, being so personalized to you versus to Emily versus to me, that is the ultimate promise of what this technology is. I think we have some ways to go to get there, to get our organizations aligned, processes, technologies. But to me, that is so exciting to truly be able to deliver incredible value to customers and be able to have that one-on-one experience with customers. And I think generative AI can really get us there.
That's so cool. I can't believe that we're here, which just makes me wonder even more about what are we going to see within the next year. So I want to ask you both to make one more prediction for me. What's one AI trend or use case that's going to get more attention within this next year?
Just content. Content is going to be everywhere. Our ability to create content has basically increased by the power of 10. I mean, think about it. I can write content right now just by giving a prompt into any generative AI engine and come up with 16,000 versions. What's going to happen with all that content? How is that content going to get managed? How is that content going to get created and deployed and all of that? So I think there's going to, the subject of content is going to be really important because it is the fuel for how do you engage with a customer, right? And how do you personalize that experience? So I think content is going to increase in importance, and it's going to become an important corporate asset that has to be managed, that has to be governed, that has to be really treated as an asset.
I'm really excited about our ability to leverage creativity for more. So not like as a writer, I struggle with the word content because I'm like, well, there's more effort that that I put into these things than just content. And I think that's an important perspective because I want ownership of what I'm creating. And so I think the ability to leverage this, I still 2 decades into my career, struggle with a blank page. So I love these tools for giving me a place to start, for really easing that kicking off process. And I think over the next year, we're going to see that be taken advantage of. I think the examples I shared earlier sound huge, but I do think they're realistic. So the ability to take me and what I know and create so many more things out of that information for others. Pierre says create lots of content. We have a lot of conversations about the content supply chain. Like, how are we going to manage so much? Earlier this year, we published a paper on navigating the age of content abundance. And I think that's a very appropriate framing for the coming year.
I got to be honest with you, Emily. I see generative AI replacing creativity at that mundane level that we're talking about. I think the creativity is going to be on what's next. I think where we apply our creativity is not on writing copy anymore, but the creativity is being applied to, because there's somebody else that's doing that. Our creativity in the future is going to be what's next. How can I add more services? How can I add more functions? How can I do more with that customer? That's where I think the human worker is going to be evolving to, and worry about things that are not being taken care of generative AI. And I think that's where the creativity is going to come from. I agree with you. I think the creativity is going to be actually being relocated to other things that generative AI is going to be doing. That's where I believe the exciting part of generative AI is.
I want one more moment, because you and I, we know we disagree. I think there's such an importance in human creativity.
I said there is creativity. I just think it's going to be displaced to other things, not on writing copy anymore.
Well, and I think you'd find that people appreciate that, right? The example I use regularly is like, we want you thinking about creating 5, 10 images, what the prompts for those are going to be, not resizing an image for 17 different platforms and mediums. Right. So that is an aspect of like moving that creativity. But I do want to be sensitive, because I think, people like me have spent many years developing expertise in certain things, and that's still absolutely going to be necessary.
This is good, y'all. I feel like I can hear the viewers, having their own debates in their cars right now. This is good stuff. And I don't know if you're going to agree or disagree on this next one, but I'm going to pitch it to you anyway. What's the biggest misconception about AI?
I think the biggest misconception about AI is that it's going to replace human creativity, or is going to displace the American or the global worker. I don't think it is at all. I mean, think about it. Yes, there's going to be disruption, but we've gone through many evolutions and revolutions, industrial revolution in the world. There's more jobs today than there were in 1900s, for sure. I think, again, I talk about replaced or relocated creativity. I talk about relocated efforts. We're going to be worried about other things, where we're going to bring more complexity, more innovation, more creativity to the products and services that we deliver to our clients. You're going to see a hotel chain being able to deliver not only a hotel room, but an entire experience when you travel, curate that entire trip for you, from the airline to the restaurant to the entertainment, in addition to the room, right? You're going to see, and we're seeing that already, right? You're going to see brands be able to expand and flex their business models in ways that were not possible before. So that's what the employees within our organization is going to be working on, less so on writing copy. Yeah, Gen AI will write the copy for me. The question is, how to recreate my business model? How to recreate my business processes? How do I create collaboration and partnerships with other companies to bring a whole different curated customer experience to my customers? That's where I think creativity will go. So generative AI will allow us to worry less about mundane things and start to work on things that were not possible before, just like every other revolution that we've seen that have kind of displaced us. So there'll be disruption, there'll be pain, there'll be displacement of workers, but there will be advancement. There will be more creativity in how brands personalize and deliver experiences to their customers. And to me, that is the most exciting part about generative AI.
I think we might have hit on points that Pierre and I actually agree on, which is a great way, I think, to head towards the end of this conversation. We are in a very disruptive time, but it's that itself is not new. Like, Some of us are old enough to remember the advent of computers and the advent of smartphones. And the last time a whole class of work was changed in how people approach it. So I think disruption is a great word as much as it's often a buzzword. We're seeing massive change, but that doesn't mean it's bad change. It could be really fascinating. And it's why I love what I do and having these conversations.
It's so clear that you both love what it is that you do, and it's making me love what you do as well. So, Emily and Pierre, this has been an incredibly fun conversation. Thank you both for taking some time out to hang out with us today. To all of you who are listening, to those of you who are watching, look out for a very personalized world because it's here and it's just growing. So keep tuned in here for even more AI in action, and we'll see y'all soon.